This is the Spiritual Download. Today I'm interviewing Ishtar. Our goal today is just kind of to get to know Ishtar, both on a personal level, but also how he experiences life. So my first question for Ishtar is going to be, when did you first realize that life is something more than just, everyday life? What was that first experience for you?
Boy, I think that there was always something of that awareness peppered through my childhood. In my case, there was a lot of what I later would call spiritual experience, especially up until about the age of 7. But in many ways, I kind of took it for granted. And so I think what your question is really getting at, I would give a slightly different answer to. And that really hit home when I was about 13 and I was in a car accident and I had a near-death experience. And that was, along with a lot of along with a lot of the classic sort of experiences of the NDE, I also was brought into this profound silence, for lack of a better word. I had no words. I didn't have an adequate vocabulary for what was happening at the time. And it was quite strange because in the car accident, I also lost my mother. And so along with this grief that you would expect to have, there was this vast sense of presence and peace and stillness and almost a kind of omniscience and a lack of fear, which was quite interesting, because I had no idea how afraid I was of so many different things and how anxious and how tense I was around life in general, until it was, I suppose, all stripped off of me. So that was the most powerful entrance into the fact that, for most of my life, I realized I'd been living like a near life experience. I realized I'd been living under so many different illusions, and that life had so many intermediate veils that I just had no clue about. So that was that.
Interesting. So if when most people hear this story about you, how do most people react? Because I feel like some people would say, "Oh, I'm sorry that you lost your mother," but then other people would be super interested in your subjective experience. So how do most people react?
Well, actually, it's just as you described it. Typically, it's a mixture of both, because people are pretty polite, and that's something that people, it's so many years after the fact, but people still see fit to sort of offer their condolences. But yeah, both of those things. If people are interested in the second thing, then they're going to ask about it.
Right.
Yeah.
So then after that experience, what did the next few years of your life look like? And how old were you again when you said that this happened?
I was 13. Yeah,
Okay.
I was, I don't know if I was a young or an old 13, maybe a mix of both. But, coming into adolescence, big time of change anyways. And so, it happened like right at the beginning of summer. And I had kind of a grace period afterward, which I didn't really understand, at the time, exactly the ramifications of what was happening. So I had about, 2 or 3 months where, there was this mix of kind of at once, being the teenager, whatever that meant, being a grieving son, and then having this vast sort of inner dimension that I was sort of actively playing with. And that was, that was profound. And then after about 3 months, that kind of started to fade out. And so when that faded out, the absence of that was painful. And so the normal pain of suddenly sort of being without one's mother, of having the sense that, one's nuclear family was kind of really buckling under, the emotional pressures that had been released, that was aggravated. And that was, all the more in my experience. So, it must have taken me about, I was trying to do my best to be a whatever, an 8th grader, trying to kind of pick up my old life. And I spent about, I think, 1 year to 2 years in sort of an attempt to try to be whatever I thought the old person was, who was existing before the NDE, but it was just ultimately unsuccessful. So there was a lot of depression the first time I was, I'm not necessarily prone to that, although, it's in my family. And so that was, it was kind of a rough period. And then at a certain point, something, I walked into a metaphysical bookstore one day. I wasn't interested in the metaphysical bookstore at the time, although as a child, I was absolutely fascinated with yogis and Tibetan monks, and anything of that nature was just, I just didn't value that, or I didn't pursue it any further. And so I walked into this shop with my sister, and there it was. And once I opened up kind of a book at random in the book section and saw that they were actually describing the experiences of yogis, they sounded so similar to the states that I had, about several months back been enjoying, that I was hooked. And so, it took a long time in teenage years for me. I thought I was really dragging my feet. I was afraid to meditate. The books were telling me that you're going to have no self anymore. And I was like, well then what's the point? It's like, I'm going to do all that work and I'm not going to exist anymore. I was taking it really literally. And some of the books, I have to say, maybe were explaining it in that sort of, in that very good manner like that. And so, yeah, it was about 3 years, 4 years of segueing from kind of being, losing one's mother to gradually starting to come to this realization that, there's this kind of very serious or very earnest yogi or spiritual seeker or mystic or monk or whatever word I wanted to give to it, that was kind of bubbling up and rising up. And that's kind of a broad overview of how those years went.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. I'm really interested in kind of the topic of teenage angst, because me myself, I experienced very deep kind of existential depression for about 2 years when I was 16, 17 years old. I'm wondering if you see a connection between that sort of feeling or sense with kind of the feeling of spiritual seeking and eventually self-understanding. Where do you see as a connection?
Oh, I found that fascinating too, and I actually do see some general connections. I mean, without a near-death experience or that maybe that disposition, if we want to talk about like Freudian or Jungian, in Freudian or Jungian terms, we just bring up the word individuation right there, and that's what's happening in any teenager's life, is that they're hopefully they've had a reasonably decent time with their nuclear family, which of course is not always the case, but then there's that period of trying to get away from all the masks that you've been wearing for the sake of others, and that's the teenage years right there. And so in that process, I think there's a lot of, ideally, if we could jettison all the masks, total individuation in that sense, as I think is pretty tantamount to self-realization. I mean, we just don't often pull it that far. I don't see a lot of truly individuated adults, simply because the conditioning and the masks are typically so subtle and dug in there like a tick that we don't even know we're wearing them. So yeah, that's the big, overall connection that I find is right there.
For people who are kind of experiencing this angst right now, what would you say is like kind of the purpose? Is there a purpose to this angst?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think of the angst in some ways we have to break, we're like baby birds again in a certain sense, and you have to have a certain amount of fire and fury to break out of the shell, and I think there's a certain amount of angst in a way that comes with the pecking, and the beating against those structures, and sometimes it's not particularly intelligently directed, but it's emotions, and yeah, I mean, there's certainly that purpose is that there's some great transformation that is trying to happen, and in any kind of growth process, there's always some kind of positive tension involved in breaking free of an old structure and stepping into something new.
Okay, yeah, let's get kind of back into your own personal story.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so kind of your high school experience. What was kind of your high school experience like?
It was pretty pretty heterogeneous, I have to say. I mean, you know, there's a big spectrum from you know, just you know, experiencing jealousy with girlfriends, of you know, of you know, trying to, you know, having codependent relationships, and um, you know, on one end, and I'm not going to actually favor any of these, it's just a big soup, to, you know, going off to the edge of campus and you know, um, climbing up into a tree, you know, kind of skipping class. That was not me. I was always but you know, a pretty solid academic performer. But I would sit in this tree, and I had this vision in my heart of mountains, and I felt I need to go to some, I need to go to some far off mountain monastery, because this is not the life I'm supposed to be living. And I need to do it now at 14 or 15, because I'm wasting time here. You know, I'm wasting time living in this dream world that I see constructed around me, and I should be willing, you know, I was really pressuring myself and kind of berating myself a little bit, you know, for being a coward. That, you know, that was how I was judging myself. You're a coward if you're going to be cowed into, you know, accepting this life, you know. So there was that was my angst. That was a big part of the angst, was right there. Is this tension of, I was afraid to meditate. Like I said before, I was afraid. It felt as if there was a crazy monk inside myself. And my whole life, I'd always been sort of psychologically wired to, if you're going to do something, you should do it all the way, and don't waste time, don't waste energy. You should do it with total focus and total dedication. And I was just afraid to do that with that crazy monk, because I figured, well, that if I do that, I'm going to explode, you know, the safe approach to life that people are, my family was hoping for me, and I was kind of, you know, in a certain sense still hoping for, you know, going to some highfalutin college or university and playing it safe and getting as remunerative a job as possible. And it seemed that if I opened up that door to the crazy monk, then I may very well be hitchhiking around the globe with a begging bowl. God knows, you know, and you know, giving up, you know, not having any possessions, and really living like Saint Francis, and that actually at the crescendo of this consideration, that movie by Zeffirelli, Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, came into my life, and that was that. You know, I was ripe, and watching St. Francis's conversion scene, as depicted in that movie, of taking off of his clothes, you know, giving them to his father, and walking off into the Umbrian countryside. That was that, you know, you know, you know, the impressionable and passionate teenager I was. That was the final straw that tipped the scales in that direction. But it was, you know, also normal teenagers, you know, like being stupid, being smart, having all sorts of neurotic, like anybody else in the general sort of North American teenage age group, of, you know, worrying if people liked me, and having all this sense of being unloved, and all those unprocessed childhood issues, and having to struggle with those daily. And it wasn't really until I flipped the script and kind of made a commitment to that crazy monk, even with bad techniques. Once I made a commitment to that development, oh God, I think about half of that neurotic load just fell off, you know, right away. You know, I mean, some of the seeds still kind of came up, but you know, there was so much don't give a fuck in a healthy way that came with that choice, that I was a new person. And actually, I rather enjoyed my last, although I was kind of torturing myself with the ascetic practices, I rather enjoyed my last year of high school, which was the one in which I was kind of a quasi high school monk type character, because I was seeing people for who they were. I really enjoyed that. I was actually, because I had such a decrease in my own existential BS, you know, rattling around the brain. It was such a pleasure to actually see people, to have the wherewithal to actually take people in, and you know, have interactions with people I'd never had interactions with before, and see the whole world and see everybody in a fundamentally different way. and have a great deal of mystical experiences in that last year of high school. And so in some ways I was a little sad to leave, and I left early. I graduated, but I organized that I could leave at a half year because I had such a strong impulse that I needed to get out of Dodge, and I needed to get to some kind of ashram as soon as possible. And it was so that was, I don't want to prattle on too much, but that's kind of how things went.
Did you have any fear at all of like not going to college and instead kind of going in this kind of ascetic slash meditator?
Yes, and kind of no in a certain sense, but absolutely. I mean, and kind of how I did it, and maybe I realize now that I think it was probably a good way of doing it, and how I often would do hard decisions was I would find whatever I thought my worst case scenario was. And if I was cool with that, if that was worth it to me, then I knew I was a go for launch in whatever I was doing. And I really considered it for a long time. It didn't look like that from the outside. I think a lot of my family and a lot of people, to them, it must have seemed, because I would often kind of hold things close to the chest and not bring things out until I had deliberated upon them for some time. So to the outside, it looked rather sudden. Like what the hell is up with this guy? Is he going to kill himself? What's going on? But yeah, I had been thinking around that issue, and when it turned out that my worst case wasn't death, it was more the lead up to it, and it was really more social disapprobation and kind of being sort of cast aside by what I felt was a fairly callous, it still is a fairly callous society that appreciated wealth and kind of position and all the sorts of bullshit trappings that have nothing to do with anything. And so I figured like I'm probably just going to end up like on the side of a highway starving with people driving by and having mud puddles spray on me. And when I came to the realization that I can do that in bliss, I can do that, and as long as I am completely in line with what's beating this heart, with that North Star that is trying to push this life, I'm good. And so once that was there, which really the St. Francis film that I already mentioned, that really quite did it for me, then I was like, yeah, I can be a Franciscan monk with dirty feet, and I'd been fasting quite a bit at that time. I can be malnourished, and I can keep on ticking. Let's do it, because this is the right thing to do. I suppose I mentioned there was also that moralistic sense at the time. There was kind of an ethical sense, although I mean it felt more like sort of a non-rational, trans-rational drive. There was also this sense that I was raised with, which was you need to live the highest, truest life that you possibly can. There was this sense of your life needs to actually solve the problems of the world or contribute to that. And so for most of my life, coming from up here, I thought that, I should be like a public servant, or I should be, like maybe a university teacher or a public intellectual or whatever position, and I would try to work to improve the outer circumstances of people. And I think that's still a wonderful thing for people to do, and one can do that and become self-realized. One can do that and know the silence. But for me, the pressure was, really like, okay, you need to, when I started to read about this Enlightenment thing, and when I started to kind of read books that were saying like, like you can try to solve a lot of these problems, but they're going to kind of keep coming back because the underlying issues have a great deal to do with this these massive unhealed traumas, the structure of the ego itself, where Buddhism 101 came into my life, and realizing that there are these more basic fundamental knots that we carry, that if we could address those knots, a lot of these other issues that kind of dominate our consciousness would either perhaps go away, or perhaps the solutions would be a whole lot more forthcoming. And so that was the ethical issue. So like an ethical person thus should go ahead and get enlightened first, because otherwise they're going to just be like Sisyphus. They're going to be pushing rocks up and self-sabotaging at the same time.
So do you think there's some advantage for people who are super passionate about trying to become enlightened as fast as possible and really push themselves, like do the fasting, maybe having one meal a day, meditating for 6 to 8 hours a day, waking up at 4 a.m.? What are some of the advantages of that versus kind of more the slower, maybe more sustainable way? What are some of the advantages that you see for yourself?
Right. Well, sometimes the fast way for some souls, that's the sustainable way. Because like for me, I would have driven myself crazy if I didn't give into those impulses. And because ultimately I've found that those impulses weren't coming from the old sausage factory up here. They were coming from a much deeper source. And so I say to anybody, if it's in your disposition, if you're being pushed, if your script is reading for you to be quite passionate, then we're going to put you on that passionate track. And maybe on the outside, you might cool down and it might, look a little bit more mild. And that'll be fine too. I think that both, if I don't necessarily divide a taxonomy into those two types of functioning, but I do think that, different people have different needs, it should have different programs set up for them. And that even those different people within their lives, they're going to have different periods, which kind of demand sometimes more useful boundaries, more practices, more discipline. And then other times they're going to need to sort of loosen up a little bit more. And so, that's why I find it helpful that I've had guidance along the way of people who are kind of able to sort of work with me and kind of discern, what was needed at what time, and help me sort of tailor different programs at different times. So yeah, I don't see an advantage necessarily. The advantages for anybody is hopefully let's get you set up with whatever your dispositional needs are right now and in this moment, and go with that and see how that goes. And yeah. So
not everyone needs to go to an ashram or a meditation place right away, right?
No, God, no. And sometimes it's really bad. Sometimes it would be the worst place. There's a lot of people who are going to grow the quickest if they have, I think generally regular practice for most people at a certain level is going to be needed. Like being a lazy couch potato, for maybe some once in a while, and maybe just totally relying on grace might well work for some. And, but I think in general, some degree of discipline, some degree of channeling of the energy, is going to be needed. But that can be like meditating an hour a day, or meditating for 40 minutes a day, split up between 2 20-minute sessions, and developing other little boundaries that can be helpful. Like sometimes, if you stuff your feelings, like say, but with brownies, they can be a very liberating act to, like instead of having 4 brownies, maybe have 1 brownie, then maybe peter off that 1 brownie, and all those sorts of little things, ancillary and auxiliary things on the side. Taking up a yoga practice, that there's of course a great deal of benefit to making intelligent choices, to using the wisdom center to sort of refine the life and to channel all that focus.
So when you did move into the ashram, what did you learn about yourself, and kind of what were some experiences that you had, I guess, either subjectively or kind of interesting stories that you have to tell us about your experience there?
I've got a lot of stories. Well, where to start? This is kind of a big vault because it was magical. First of all, in my life, I've had a lot of precognitive experiences that were just very spookily sort of come to pass. So I was a frequent daydreamer as a child. And a lot of my daydreams would get very detailed, and I would have conversations with people I haven't met yet. And then I would meet them, like a couple of weeks later. And of course, being rational as well as always said, memory is faulty. I've probably just, I'm retroactively filling that in. And, at the same time, there was still a lot of spookiness with those sorts of things. So one interesting thing actually about the monastic experience happened about a year before I ever got there. So and that was, I was walking around in the Walmart. I was age 17. This was before, by several months, giving into the crazy monk, that was sitting in there. And I was planning at that time to go to as good of a college or university that I could get into and just meditate, 1 to 2 hours a day and do my yoga practice. And, I thought that'll be great. And so I was pretty happy, really happy at the time. And I was just in the Walmart, and it came to me, as it often did, to sort of ask, you should ask where you're going to be a year from now. So I said, okay, where am I going to be a year from now in my head? And I was greeted with this sort of cinematic kind of detailed vision with narration, which was not uncommon in my life. It was like the daydreams. I would just have them when walking around. And here it was, well, you're going to be living with a group of monks, and you'll be working with them in a mostly vegetarian cafe. And you will start out as a dishwasher, and you'll get trained progressively in all the jobs until you get trained, by a chef, and eventually, run the kitchen as kind of a head chef. And a lot of them will be wearing all white. And I had this vision of looking through like a wooden ticket window at this sort of wood paneled wall that has a juice bar in front of it and some ferns hanging out of these hanging baskets that were connected to the vertical beams with these wrought iron fixtures. So it's very detailed. And I saw somebody who had kind of like mocha type skin tone with long black hair, wearing all white, working at the juice bar, and somebody walks by her. And then the vision came to an end, and I said, well, that's interesting. I thought that's very unlikely. And I kind of just, like, if I had it in my hand, I sort of threw it over my shoulder and kept doing what I was doing. And so about a year later, I was calling this meditation center down in the Oregon coast. And the last thing that the fellow, the interviewer, says to me, he says, well, oh, by the way, we might have a job for you there. We're just about to open up a cafe. And that kind of perked my ears up. And I was like, oh my God, really? And I was actually kind of nervous at the time. I thought I better not be too excited. They'll throw me out. I was really nervous about being accepted to this place. And so, I didn't necessarily put it together with the vision until I was made the dishwasher, and then I started to be trained in all the things. And then one day, as I was chopping some potatoes in front of that ticket window, I looked, and the exact scene that I had seen previously was there. And I was like, I wasn't surprised, because this whole environment that I found myself in, it was almost as if I had walked into like a vat of intense presence and an intense synchronicity. It was as if that feeling of stillness and that feeling of presence and the kind of magic that's in the air, if you've ever experienced that, was just everywhere. So there we were. So that was one of the first things, is that this environment was different. This environment was hyper saturated with the je ne sais quoi that I was searching for. And I in some ways I didn't find out about myself. There's another funny story there. I rather thought myself the runt of the litter. I was really, at 18, I was really quite, not out of the woods by any means. I was comparing myself to, I was the kid there as the youngest one. And I hadn't gone through the big, long 6-month meditation retreat that really transforms consciousness. And I thought, oh God, I'm way behind. They're going to kick me out any day. And it's like, these people can read all my thoughts, and God, they know all my neuroses here. And I felt so naked and kind of exposed and kind of like, and so 3 months after being in this ashram, I had the opportunity to go back home to Wisconsin to go to my sister's wedding. And so I went back, and when I got there, it was actually, that was interesting, because I felt such a stillness inside myself. There was such a presence in there. and I was, you know, back in my old hometown, in my home environment with family and friends, and in many cases, I was kind of shocked. I was like, was it always like this? You know, that were people always so kind of tangled up inside? Because I felt it very, very deeply, the conflict inside everybody, very viscerally, and how difficult it was to order a pizza without having some sort of you know, friction happen inside someone. And this was not the case back at the ashram. And so, you know, that kind of actually showed me that, okay, you know, something has been going on here, even though I hadn't noticed it because I was so busy, you know, on the surface playing with a little bit of comparison, that all the while there was such kind of a saturation happening at maybe subtler levels that was real and palpable. And so I often share that story in meditation classes, you know, because that's one of the most helpful pieces of advice I can give to people, is to be innocent and to kind of relax the whole game of self-comparison, and relax the whole thing of like expecting, you know, kind of behaving like we were taught to in school and our professions, to create this sort of rubric of goals and sort of you know, objective points and experiences that are going to somehow denote you're getting someplace. Because in the meditation game, that it's more like we're waking up a dormant space. And it's like, I often use the analogy, it's like walking into a darkened room from a bright hallway, and the bright hallway is the realm of comparison and the old habits of thinking. And so we can be very deep into that darkened room, but if we're still looking up at the bright hallway, it's like we're attenuating to that space, and we've already moved into a very different level of functioning. So, you know, there was, you know, I could mention the Holy Spirit. I mentioned synchronicities were, I mean, so abundant that one became used to them. Just weird, crazy synchronicities. Like I remember one time I had a dream about, we just moved into this another property, an old church, and we were gonna sort of fix it up. We were releasing with an eye to buy it at some point, and it's beautiful actually for our purposes. And I remember being in there, and I had this kind of dream about big, like plush, velvety red curtains, and I remember coming home one day, and there they were. And all on the walls, beautiful curtains, and walked in one of the head teachers, you know, brilliant, bright soul. She said, "Ishtar, I got these with you in mind." And it's like, yeah, you know, and I could, you know, when she delivered those words to me, it was as if, how to explain, I could feel her consciousness just completely inside mine, and not in an invasive way, but in a unitive sort of way. And so many things like that, you know, occurred, and that was, you know, part of our training was to cultivate the experience of samadhi, to allow ourselves to relax into that, and try to do that 24/7, because when one's in that state, it's as if it's a doorway that just naturally opens up all these other unfoldments, you know, all these things that actually have an effect in practical life. Things like, you know, the New Age often, manifestation is a very popular subject in the New Age, and manifestation was very common. You know, I never thought of it as really as when it would happen in a big way in my life. I didn't think of it as me making something happen, although, you know, you could say that, just as well say that was what happened, but I felt it was me being so fundamentally relaxed, you know, into this kind of a natural state, that you know, my life was naturally being moved along the easiest course, you know, through the river. And that, you know, in having that happen, it was as if abundant gifts were just there. Like the universe is a user-friendly place. And so I know I wrote about it on my blog at one point, but, you know, one time we had this wonderful cafe that I mentioned, and you know, one time I'd always had this desire, for instance, to actually have a manifestation experience so big that my rational mind couldn't explain it away as coincidence. Because, you know, I was pretty good at explaining a lot of things away as coincidence. And so one day it just came out of my mouth, like, wouldn't it be cool if like 20 people came in here right now? That was like, we had a 42 seat cafe, so that'd be like half. We'd only had a table of 8 once. And, that was a big to-do, I remember. And so 20 was just ludicrous, just a ludicrous number. And so, but that's what came out. No rational thought. It was more like it just came out naturally from this reservoir of stillness. And then the phone rang, and the waitress kind of yelled into the kitchen, "Hey guys, you better get ready. Like 20 people are coming in 5 minutes." And I just said, like, "Yeah, right. You heard me." Like, "Yeah, nice joke." And then she like came closer. She said, "No, it's actually happening." No, she didn't hear what I'd said. She said, "This is happening. You better get yourself ready." It's like, and I don't think since she hadn't heard me, I was like, okay, it's on. When I saw 20 people streaming through that door, I was already felt in a very deep and magical sort of state of consciousness that just pushed me even deeper. And myself and my co-chef were so in the flow. And, we were usually in the flow, but we were so in the flow for that 20 that we beat the drinks out, and we made appetizers too. We had to take the plates out ourselves. We had 20 main plates and like 4 or 5 appetizers, and we made it in like about 5 to 7 minutes. I looked at the clock and it was like 5 minutes. I'd never produced food that quickly, but there was no friction. It was like a motor that had no moving, no colliding parts. And the whole, it was just this dance, and it almost looked like the clock went backwards. And so when we brought the food out, the people were shocked. And one of the first things they jokingly accused us of was, "Hey, you're just giving us somebody else's food. It's probably cold. We want fresh food." It's like, no, we just made it right now. And so that was magical. But my rational mind could explain that away. So once we cleared the tables and the thing was there again. I wasn't thinking of it. It was there. It's like, wouldn't it be cool if 18 people came in? And there it was. 18 people came in, and we sat them in the exact same spot, because that's the only place we could fit such large parties was in the back. And so it was part 2. Only we sort of just about ran out of food, and we had to chop stuff on the fly. And it was a little bit more difficult, but the joy was there. So, those are just, a little bit of my experiences, but the whole kind of, pretty much everybody there had these wonderful moments in which they had, experientially, very palpably, revealed to them that there's something vast and something powerful that's actually moving, that's actually running this show, that's really moving things, and that, all one has to do is to just really sort of fundamentally relax, and so many doors have this tendency of opening. So there's a story. I don't want to talk too much, but yeah, there's just the sense that life is really this sort of magical process, and more deeply that. There's a quote that goes around the internet. There are lots of different derivations of it. People, sometimes put it by Jim Carrey, and they'll say, like, when one starts, one feels like it's, life, you're trying to do life, and as one sort of evolves spiritually, one has the experience that, life is really doing you and moving through you. And I like to use the wave ocean analogy. Was when I started, I was this, kind of aspiring wave that was, trying to make really energetic incursions into this ocean, and so but that was still there's this still sort of idea of being mainly this small little guy with a history, with who's doing the best that they can, and kind of having to struggle and fight and go on. And at some point, the context, the overall context, shifts from to being this more oceanic presence, to kind of having this sense of being, in some ways, like relaxed into life itself, and having the sense that life is moving and living itself, and we just have to have these little nervous systems that'll allow for a kind of an individualized experience of it. But there's this vastness that's moving and running the show, and there's a bliss there. There's a real bliss. It's, you know, it's like being a surfer, I suppose. I was a rubbish surfer, but I guess this is sort of a life surfing type of thing.
That's so interesting, because here in the United States, and I guess in other countries too, we're always just so busy. And I mean, one of the main aspects of our life is being at work. We're literally at work like a third of our life. So I'm wondering, like, how can we, you know, go to our 9-to-5 jobs, yet also feel whole or feel complete, and have that juxtaposed with like this busyness where you feel like I'm stressed, this is imperfect. How can we, you know?
Right. You know, and I was lucky, because although I did work outside of the little ashram kind of container, a lot of the magic, you know, initially was happening there the most, because that was a very supportive environment where everybody, you know, had the same purpose, and everyone was meditating with their eyes open as well, and you could take meditation breaks when you needed to, and so that was a nice place to kind of have as a starter environment, and that, you know, I found that it spread once one is sort of strong enough and has a bit of a momentum, then yeah, that starts to happen. And wherever you go, you can be surrounded by assholes, and you know, that starting that way would be I think a little bit more difficult. There'd be a little bit more, it might take a little bit more time, or a little bit more, you know, energy if, say, one is, you know, all by themselves, perhaps, but it can be done. And you know, my method was through meditation practice. And so I would take I would have the eyes open practice, which was nice to do as a supplement to the eyes closed practice. But when I needed to, like if I was really stuck on something, or really sometimes you know, have a day where like you're really stuck in some sort of fundamental judgment or not, and sometimes I would just take even a minute or 30 seconds, and I would just stop what I was doing, close my eyes, and even if I'm leaning on the counter, I would do my meditation. And that little act would change the whole inner and outer environment for me. And I'd be good. And, you know, if I wanted to do you know, in other jobs, I have a little bit of a sit down meditation. Well, I would go and I would take like a 5-minute bathroom break, and you know, that would do it. That would give me a little bit of a break to kind of decompress. You know, and I think that, you know, really commitment's helpful as well. I mean, because we can take all these actions, but you know, sometimes we just have to get to a certain inner orientation. To have certain progress. Like if my front burner commitment was somehow, you know, like convincing as many people on the outside to like me by you know, donning as many masks as was necessary, that's going to cut into the effectiveness of whatever meditation or spiritual practice you're up to. I mean, it's just, there's no getting around that. So at some point, either one has some wisdom come in through pleasure, or one hits that brick wall enough times to realize this is no way to live, that, you know, that I'm a slave to these things. But, you know, if one has the sense that, you know, very clear sense that, you know what, I just want to find this, I just want to find truth. You know, if one has that commitment, then right there, you know, one can take up a practice and in any environment be making really good, profound progress. Because with that commitment, then every experience in life, instead of becoming some sort of stumbling block that's the kind of part of this universe that's ultimately conspiring to crush you or get you or, you know, cause subterfuge, becomes part of the lesson. Becomes, you know, every single person, every situation can then be viewed as, this is another thing that my commitment has brought me. You know, this is another aspect. And that just that orientation from kind of being a victim who views themselves living in a Machiavellian world to kind of being this open-hearted experimentalist creator is a profound shift. And, you know, and sometimes it, you know, as the intuition gets clear and you might be driving to work one morning and, or not. And the voice from the stillness says like, you should quit this job, you know, then it's up to us to sometimes heed that. And, you know, those can be tests too, you know, it's like, because sometimes often intuition is in variance to what, you know, the best laid plans of the analytical mind is going to, you know, come to. And, you know, so, you know, there are the next steps on the journey.
Yeah, I was thinking, like people in my family, for example, are really focused on like service and serving others. So I'm wondering if is that itself kind of a meditation practice? I think Gandhi has a quote like, to know yourself, throw yourself into the service of others. Is that a way to learn about the universe in general, just trying to serve other people?
Yes, I absolutely think it can be. I've loved, you know, service was a big part of the draw for me, and a big part of what I was up to in the monastic setting. And, you know, that being in service, you know, just opens one up to, you know, takes one out of their own little tiny problems and takes one outside of their own little personal, private, skewed view of things, and then that can be deeply expansive. We're both Midwesterners, and so talking as a Midwesterner, I certainly noticed that there can be some pitfalls to that by what people call being selfless, because often, you know, in Wisconsin and Minnesota, it can come along with heavy doses of ignoring, you know, of kind of like, you know, papering over a deep malaise which really needs to be dealt with. So sometimes people will you know, use selflessness as a kind of a cover for avoiding, you know, feeling certain things or for acknowledging certain things. But, you know, short of that, you know, true service, you know, is wonderful. And, you know, sometimes you get a little bit of both. We're human beings, so we're complicated, and you'll have people who are definitely growing by, you know, by making themselves open and available, but they also need to not forget about the fact that, you know, having meditation practice, having some self-kindness, receiving help from other people, receiving love from other people is also medicine that they deeply need on their own journeys to wholeness and you know, bliss and enlightenment and, you know, full self-actualization.
So are there any like sort of like practices or exercises, like someone, for example, like me, who's like, you know, part of the Minnesota nice kind of mentality? What are some ways that I can kind of express from the heart, or figure out what are some of like the hidden aspects about myself that I'm not sure of because, you know, I've suppressed them kind of as a stoic Minnesotan throughout my life? What are some things?
Right. Yeah. Well, apart from like, you know, the short and long term benefits of a meditation practice, which takes one down to ground zero, you know, which is where it's going underneath all that conditioning. Like the things that are supplementary helpful, I find are, for instance, periods of radical honesty, which can, you know, people have to use some discernment to know how far they're going to go. So it's a bit of more of an art, but that, you know, that gets the pipes cleaned, you know, because that's one of the hindrances that comes with, you know, knowing what's going down there, is that we've kind of gulped things back habitually for so long that we don't even know anymore the natural response, which is nevertheless happening. And so that helped me a great deal. Just deciding one day, you know what, I think I'm becoming a sort of a liar, you know, a pathological liar in some ways, although no one would accuse me of it because it's what passes for normal around these parts. But, you know, that was an impetus to just start telling people what I was afraid to tell them, you know, just start telling them what was in my heart to say. And that I found very quickly started to open me up to deeper layers and deeper strata of my own feelings, and started to sort of resensitize me to my instrument, to what was really going on down there. So, and it's, you start to see your own masks too. And you're like, oh, wow. And then I found that a lot of the people who I was most afraid to say, whatever it was to say toward, because I feared that there would be some sort of terrible response, would actually thank me for it, sincerely. And then I realized something that, when those things happen, I realized that at a certain level, especially if we're coming from a place of, obvious purity, pure intentions, and obvious, goodwill, most of us want to return back to that truthfulness. Most of us feel shackled in some way and are longing for people to kind of come in and pull some of the rugs out from under us, because we're sick of the damn rugs ourselves. And so that's one way. Doing service is always, as we mentioned, is always also quite good. But I think having those things mixed together. One thing that, oh good Lord, you could say this is kind of part of radical honesty, but one thing that I always made to do was ask for things quite a bit. And this is, mainly, and this was me, but I think it's also in a lot of our conditionings generally in our culture, is that, it's very difficult for people to receive things. And it's also very difficult for people to ask for things cleanly and then receive it. So I don't know how many times I would get up in front of groups of people or interrupt, a room full of people talking about something to, come out with something that was terribly frightening for me to say. And yet it was so liberating to do that. And so liberating to, people have all these little tics where, like, you try to give somebody a compliment or give somebody help. They'll, they'll do all the kind of lines in the script of, being polite. But what maybe they don't know is that all those lines, even if they seem sort of benign, they're not. They are hiding stuff. So just the act for me of cutting those lines out of my mouth, and then just would allow me to feel the feelings even that were coming up behind those things. And then I'm like, oh shit, this is okay. I've got something that I've been covering up with for years, just by these little niceties and pleasantries that everybody thinks is okay. And so just that seemingly superficial sort of effort to not do that each time, and just accept things from people, and to be present with oneself, and just to be on the spot like that, that's powerful. Much less than to tell somebody, the person you're interacting with, let them in on what's actually going on in your private universe. That is amazingly expansive for both people. That level of honesty, saying like, I am, and and when one's talking, not sugarcoating it. There are all these little ways that we play a character. Just let things come out without editing them at all. Usually a good sign that you're doing that is that the discomfort tends to increase exponentially as you're not, modifying or changing. That's, kind of find the fear and be like a bull to a red flag. That's often been a fairly useful heuristic with that sort of stuff. So, those are a couple of things.
Okay. Yeah. It seems like the, how other people influence us kind of on, I guess I would call it maybe an energetic level. Like, I'm becoming a little bit better at, if someone walks in the room, I can kind of read them. I can kind of tell if, like, they seem like a nice person, or if, they're kind of more into themselves. I can kind of read that within maybe 5 seconds. And so it seems like people have a huge influence on how you also can read, into that silence, or kind of dive deeper per se. So it seems like maybe could we be more strategic in deciding friends and how much family time we should have? Because maybe some people might be, I don't want to use the word toxic, but some people might not be as mindful as you are in trying to clean out your energy, or become more involved in your silence and your stillness in your heart. So I'm kind of wondering how you have dealt with that in your life.
No, God, that's absolutely good. I mean, that's the whole part of the whole impetus to go to like a monastic environment is you want to have a hyper concentrated group of people who are kind of supporting the same journey. And you know, outside of that, yeah, I mean, it's not a negatively selfish thing to sort of curate who you're spending time with. And you know, it's having people who positively spark joy and expansiveness as your friends group, I think, is a healthy thing to do. Just as one wouldn't necessarily, kind of, um, you know, advise a recovering alcoholic to spend most of their times in a bar. It's it's the same logic. So it's I think it's also good to have a mix of friends from all over the place, so you don't you get too much into some kind of bubble. But that said, the bubble is also helpful when we're trying to, in some ways, move out of Plato's cave. Because we're premises we're kind of living in a matrix. We're kind of living in a big bubble, and by and large, often we support each other's tendencies to kind of stay within that bubble. So anything that we can do to encourage breaking out is good. Yeah.
Great. And one other thing I was kind of thinking about was, what was kind of your process of being, I don't know if it's like a student, like a spiritual student, to transitioning to a teacher? What was that kind of subjectively in your experience, but also like what is like the process, like the practices that you have to do, or the seminars that you have to attend to become a spiritual teacher?
Yeah, I barely would use the word spiritual teacher with myself. It has so much baggage with it, and I've referred to myself as like a meditation teacher. That seems pretty, low grade enough. But less baggage, more technical. But there's of course there's a sense of kind of being an eternal student, in a certain level, and that's kind of always there. That at the same time, like logistically, the things for me to be a meditation teacher, and it's different for people in different systems and different ways. But for us, there was like a 6-month retreat program that people go through, and that involved like 12 to 18 hours a day of closed-eyed meditation.
Wow.
For 5 of those months, and on either side of those, there was kind of a preparatory period with kind of like 4 hours of closed-eyed meditation and a lot of learned material on either end, and kind of learning how to teach a course, the rules of thumb and that sort of stuff. But the 5 months was a powerful immersion, and that was life-changing. And my case was a little bit different. I had the sort of monastic experience outside of that retreat. Not everybody, some people just go to something like that, and maybe they're meditation teaching, and they're off on the road doing that. And we don't conflate meditation. We never conflated meditation teaching with being some sort of like guru, or somebody who's supposed to direct somebody's lives in every way in that old Eastern model that was sort of mainly anathema. At the same time, I find that it's if we're going to talk about spiritual teacher, maybe without any of the baggage, I find it's kind of an organic sort of process. It's just like if you seem to be pretty good at basketball, and although that's an easier thing to pick up on, that's a very objective thing. Ball goes into the hoop, and so on and so forth. But people start to maybe pick up on some kind of intuitive draw within themselves, or you start to be synchronistically thrown into meeting people, and there's some kind of chemistry there, and there's this sort of natural kind of movement to talk like friends, to interact, and there's some kind of relationship that's there, and so it's mainly that's been very organic, but yeah.
So kind of to the last part of the interview here, I kind of want to talk about your meditation techniques and some of your teachings. And I guess kind of my first question is, how do you see, since enlightenment is pretty hard to talk about, but since we're just people, how should just normal people discuss enlightenment? How can we be semi-accurate in that?
Maybe as little as possible. No, not really. We're only half serious there. But well, yeah, I think that it's generally best to lead off with as much kind of sort of experience as possible. Dive into the terrain, you know, and have a maybe a higher proportion of terrain to map, and not no map. Maps are quite helpful, and I, because here it's like we start off, and I certainly did. Just about everybody has all these projections in their head, about what is this, what is the silence, what is that, and where is that in my experience? I'd be looking around for it. People say like, it's right there. You have it. You really do have it. It's like, I don't know it. I don't know it. What are you talking about? Like, where the fuck is it supposed to be? And I really have these heated on my end, and people would laugh, kind of, oh, Ishtar, like, we don't say it to everybody, it. It's like, no, I don't. I'm neurotic as hell, and it. And I don't know this silence you're telling me about. I don't know this samadhi. And then one day it's just there, and then something clicks. And then it's a different world from that point on, by and large. And then, those projections fall away with that experience where we've had enough times there. We like, oh, it was that. And I find that all these wayposts of higher consciousness, of enlightenment, if we want to call it that, they all are kind of like moments where we kind of come to something that we've known the whole time, we've just been ignoring. And it's for most people, it's like, oh, that, and it's kind of like that. It's nothing special. It's like having a dormant arm awaken that we just didn't have that much experience with in the first place. And only, okay, wow. And, more functionality comes to it. So, it's when we're talking about it and we're young and enthusiastic, and maybe we don't have that much experience, it's always good to have it in the back of our mind somewhere, that, the line from Shakespeare, that there are more things in the heavens and the earth than in all of our philosophies, and have an understanding that, these are probably projections, and, some of it might be accurate, because we might be really tuning into an experiential level, but, take it, grasp it lightly, lead with experience, and so we have enough room to kind of realize what's already been there, that we already do know. I hope that's a helpful enough answer, or kind of got to your question.
Yeah, for sure, because it seems like you're talking about that it's simple. Like, a lot of people, I feel like, because I've been studying kind of philosophy and spirituality for a while, and at some point it kind of seems like so hard if you think about it with your brain, right? It just seems.
Yes.
Yeah, but yes. How have you come with the value of simplicity with it?
Well, actually, from the get-go, I was such an intense guy, and I remember like my second or third day, it must have been in my first week at the ashram. I kept having this dream. I was having this dream because everyone's saying like, the silence, and there was such a big kind of, I felt this big pressure to really know samadhi very clearly, because this was presented as a real milestone and kind of a foundation from which things could proceed very quickly for me. So I really wanted it. It was a big carrot. And I kept having this dream where I was in this like a birch forest, and I kept seeing this little blonde boy who looked like me at age 6. And I in the dream, I so wanted to catch him. And I kept, every time, I just knew that if I could commune with him and catch up to him, that would be samadhi. And the harder I chased him, the more elusive he became, and he would laugh at me kind of in an impish sort of way. And then I became lucid the third time I had the dream. And I realized, oh, no, just stop. Just stop. Don't try to, don't chase him. Just, he'll come to you. And that's what I needed. I needed to understand that while all my effort was important, that I was putting in, while the commitment was important, I also had to have this sense of, in this game, all this commitment is kind of being drawn to helping me to discover that which has been here the whole time, that which is more subtle than all the boxes, all the experiences I've been trained to pay attention to. And that was, I woke up from that dream in a vast silence. I woke up from it, and it was as if the silence was ringing through the whole lodge type house that I was living in. And so that and being told about a million times afterward, because I think, like many, I'm kind of a slow learner, being told a million times afterward by teachers and peers, like, no, Ishtar, it's not that complicated. You don't have to try so hard. And, you know, eventually it got through my thick skull through that and experience that, yeah, you know what, this is, you know, this is going to emerge, you know, as it emerges on its own time. That's that sort of, that I kind of am making myself really accident prone. You know, that awareness is trying to come on its own. It's the natural state. It really is the natural state. I didn't, of course, I didn't know that. I could read it in a book and kind of agree with it intellectually, but down in my gut, I was like, well, I don't think so, because, you know, what I'm experiencing now must be natural because I've had it for, you know, 19, 20, 22 years, something like that. But you know, just after enough immersions into the meditative state, things just, you know, that those tendencies to tense up, those tendencies to struggle with life, those tendencies to run around in the mind just subsided, and things kind of contextually switched around, and so that became a living experience that, yeah, you know.
Okay, yeah, it kind of sounds similar to what I was kind of reading on your website. I went to, I'll put a link to your website on the video down below, but here on your website, if you clicked about, it says the state of consciousness is always available to us. Consciousness is not some far off exotic place. We don't have to cross a literal or metaphorical burning desert of purification to be worthy of the smallest drop of its nectar. It's always here, right here, right now. It's closer than our next breath and more immediate than the next thought, because it's essentially the space that supports and gives rise to all of those things. It's the one ocean that holds the many waves and the forest that contains the countless trees. We miss it primarily because we were trained and conditioned to look at everything else and to identify ourselves as limited egoic individuals, becoming forgetful of their oceanic estate. So yeah, when I was reading about that, I really enjoyed that. So do you have any responses to the reason why that you put that on your website?
Oh, I probably put it out very empty-headedly in the best sense. That was just what was coming through my heart. But you know, in some ways it was in response to a lot of you know, where I started out, and a lot of my initial conditioning, which was, you know, very Midwestern. I'm sure very a lot of other parts of the world, but this kind of no pain, no gain sort of thing. This kind of notion that you know, of being a little individual, and you as a little individual, you work hard and you strive for these things, which you know, it's like your life is this thing that's sort of outside yourself, but kind of like driving maybe 2 inches behind your head, and you have to work hard with your brain to do everything right and make everything, you know, happen. You know, that's you know, a big part of the initial orientation in our society, and so things like the internal are, you know, kind of a little bit made tertiary, you know, or sort of luxury good items, you know, like changing your configuration around. And so things like love, for instance, that was the big thing in my life. When my mother died, after the samadhi faded out and the love that was there, strangely, I felt that the love was gone in my life. I really felt that, and it was so devastating, absolutely devastating, like being punched in the gut every morning I woke up to go to school, with, again, because I would go to bed at night and I would think, I'm going to change it with magical powers. I'm going to reset time, and I'm going to wake up and it's going to be June 5th, 1997. I'm going to do this different. And each morning I would wake up for a while, and in that place before the ego sort of turns on, as you're sort of waking up, I would have the thought, I did it. And then it would be crushed, with reality. And so I thought love was gone, but through meditation, I found that no, like love, all the love that I could possibly have, it's not made by chemical reaction with other separate people. It's not made by chemical reaction with favorable situations or circumstances. It's really this weird fountain that if we just remove enough of the leaves, on top of it, or the dirt that we put over it, is just going to gush. It's just going to come through. There's this, people in the literature like to use the word causeless joy, which sometimes sounds a little bit technical, but it's causeless. It's there. There's a fountain, and so I talk of love in the same way I might talk of consciousness. It's maybe just kind of a wet form of consciousness, or the unbound with a slight binding, and so yeah, that is the big issue in any goddamn romantic comedy or so many of the songs. We're all searching for our missing bit. We're all trying to fill that emptiness in. And so I write those words, because, a little bit proselytizing, saying like, hey, I've been there. I know what it feels like to wake up empty every morning. Even with a, good North American life, I know what it feels like to feel like you're a piece of shit and your life is terrible. And I also know that it's possible to walk from that place and tangibly, palpably have this strange sense that, there's nothing wrong with my life. There's nothing wrong with everything. And that in fact, strangely, there's everything right. That you don't have to be richer. You don't have to be smarter. You don't have to augment the costuming of your life in so many ways. All we have to do is just find a way to access what's already there, and then let that sort of fountain that sort of flow through our lives.
So how do we know when we have arrived there? I mean, it seems like human beings are natural seekers for something
Yes.
that's out there. When do we know? How do we know that we've arrived? Or
Well,
do we ever arrive?
So I like to go with that second one. This is in some ways it's a journey that's always going to be ongoing, but there are benefits from the get-go. We don't have to wait for some switch, in which like, oh my God, how much longer can I have the intestinal fortitude to do this? And then all of a sudden, it's this thing. I don't think most people's lives are really like that, even the ones who say that it was. Because often they hide the fact that they've been doing some spiritual practice for many years. Typically something of the goal of enlightenment with a practice in any event is something of the goal is everywhere along the path, and it builds up. And there are definitely markers that come along the way, but often we don't even know. We don't necessarily know the minute we pass those markers. I like to use the analogy of like if you're driving from, my Midwestern roots again, if you're driving from Illinois to Wisconsin, like from Springfield to Wisconsin, there isn't really necessarily a sign that says you're now in Wisconsin. You might get the sense that you're in Wisconsin when you pass by Madison. You realize, hey, Madison's in Wisconsin. This is a fundamentally different town than Rockford, Illinois. And so it's like that a lot. A lot of things often sort of sneak up on us like that. We're just going along, cruising through life, doing our spiritual practice, doing our what we were trained to do. In my case, I can use the word train, I suppose. And then we just sort of start to find that, hey, wow, why wasn't there reaction there? That's interesting. Or there's all this bliss that's permeating everything. We don't necessarily notice. It can be such a gradual process that we don't notice the love until it really kind of until some sort of event that we are going to notice comes around. And at that point, we that whole game of sort of, because I had that, it's like, oh my God, when am I going to be enlightened? Like, oh man, it's going to be like this and it's going to be like that. God, I hope I get there. Like, I don't know. And have all these carrots in your mind of what it's supposed to look like, and all this energy towards evaluation, that tends to drop off, because the more silence we're tuning into, that silence is so much more pleasant than sort of staying up on the surface. And so the more we go, the deeper we're starting to live gradually, the more a lot of those things kind of fall away, and we might not even be that in some ways we might not be that concerned with, when the happening is going to happen, because it's kind of happening.
I guess my last question is, people who might be listening to this, they say like, yeah, this sounds great, I want this in my life. However, they feel unmotivated in some way. I myself don't really have this issue, but a lot of people that I know and I've met throughout life, they have this sense of, I'm just not motivated. Like I'm just kind of going to go on through this easy path and just kind of accept that, rather than choose and put myself in a position, like you said, to be accident prone for like kind of this awakening. So what would you say to someone who naturally is more of an unmotivated person?
I'm not quite sure anybody is naturally unmotivated. It's just we're motivated to different things, and we often don't realize what we're actually being motivated toward. And so like you can't really, I don't think it's even wise or advisable to try to goad yourself or even bribe yourself into be motivated for something that isn't quite there. I think in anybody, it's best to sort of really embrace, because a lot of people cruise on autopilot. When you're talking about people who are unmotivated, they're actually on an autopilot and they're ignoring what's going on in there. And they're probably made some sort of deal, because there's like a sense of despondency that's in there that is actually, it's not that they're unmotivated, it's just that there are some tensions there that they're not realizing are unnatural, or maladaptations, simply because most people accept those maladaptations. But if somebody really sort of gets in touch with what they want, that's powerful. I think it's much more powerful to live life with some consciousness involved with why you're actually doing things, and not why up here, but the why right here. Like we both studied philosophy. One of the simple tools that I love to share with people was, Aristotle's means for, helping people to know what they wanted by going from, taking out all the intermediary things and really getting down to what's at base here. That's a wonderful way of getting clear with yourself. And I find generally when people are clear with themselves at those brass tacks level, their life tends to move a little bit more quickly. A lot of people avoid that because that also tends to bring up all those uncomfortable maladaptations. People start to feel that they feel despondent. No one likes to feel that way, or they start to hear all those thoughts of like, nothing good's ever going to happen in my life, or those sorts of things. But people, we can get through those things, and if people are honest with themselves and they start hearing those things, that often that actually makes a spiritual seeker out of people, because they're like, oh my God, I would like to live without, I would like to live so that I'm not shooting myself in the foot. I would like to have more joy. I would like to have more love. So there's that. And
I guess last question is, because a lot of people are big fans of Buddha at the gas pump. What was kind of your experience of meeting Rick? And I think you've met him a couple times, but what's been your experience interacting with Rick and Buddha at the gas pump?
Oh, I'm biased. I love Rick Archer. I think I liked him before I met him, and I had this sort of feeling that I was going to be kind of a fast friends with him, and that seemed to be, what was there. And our interview, even though we had some time to talk together beforehand, because I don't have any books out or really a lot of information for him to sort of pore over and come up with questions. So he was kind of sort of pre-interviewing me and to have a little grist for the mill. But a lot of the interview was organic and like us meeting each other for the first time. And so I was surprised to hear about all the similarities we had with each other. And so it was like meeting a spiritual brother in so many ways, just only removed by a few decades. Which is small in the grand scheme of things.
And also, it seems like you're very passionate about politics. So what's your prediction here in 2020?
Oh God, I'm not a great prognosticator here. I think I had a good beat on 2016, sadly, from the get-go. Here I might turn off half of the viewership, but I will say again, I hold, take this with a grain of salt. I'd take me as a meditation teacher over a political prognosticator. But if the Democratic Party, which is the kind of the party that I tend to dovetail much more with, but if the Democratic Party goes with a supposed so-called centrist conservative candidate, as opposed to the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party of our probably our mutual friend Paul Wellstone, the late Paul Wellstone of Minnesota. If they go with that, they're going to lose. If they go with somebody who's for the working class and has been for the working class for some time, they're going to win, or have the best shot of winning, because it's a populist year, and it's the choice like the 1930s. There's a lot of parallels now structurally to the 1930s. It's between right-wing populism and left-wing populism, and centrists and establishment types are still not going to do well this year. And I don't think the establishment types have gotten that through their skull, and so my hope is that my preferred candidate, to out myself, is Bernie Sanders. At this point, I don't find any candidate perfect, but having somebody who's as Cornel West, another favorite political voice of mine, says it's not a Johnny come lately, who's been advocating for the working class and for the solutions that I think are ultimately the most helpful for 40, 50 years. That's somebody that the electorate of this country is going to respond to. Because people are hurting so much, and the issues that we're facing are so vast that it's as Saint-Exupéry. I'm going to butcher this quote, but from The Little Prince, he said something like, "You don't launch a great expeditions by talking about the logistics of building ships and what to store in them. You launch great expeditions by speaking of all the wondrous things you're going to discover, by essentially by putting out a bold vision of the society in politics of the society that you want to form, and so if they do that, they'll win." Yeah.
Very good. So I'll have some links on the video to your website. Hopefully, if someone wants to connect with you, are there some upcoming opportunities to interact with you or anything like that?
Yeah, let's do this as quickly as possible. I'm going to be moving to, I'll be coming back to North America, but I'm going to be moving to Europe shortly, in several months' time. I'm still going to be coming and doing on-location classes. I do work with people via the internet these days for different things, and so that option is there. I have an upcoming class in Los Angeles. In a few weeks, I have a class in Vancouver, British Columbia this next weekend. My course schedule on my website is fairly up to date. I don't have anything off. I'll be making my first teaching trip to the United Kingdom. Oddly enough, this September, I have one date scheduled there in Liverpool, and then I'm pretty open to going and teaching classes in any other towns in the UK, and I'll be in sort of moving through Europe, probably doing a week-long meditation retreat in northern Italy or Switzerland sometime in October. And those are for people who already know my practice, who have had some time to do it, so that they're comfortable going for 7 days and just meditating most of every day. And so, I'm very responsive to emails as quickly as I can be. And you can do that by writing through the contact box of either of my websites. So, yeah.
Okay, I'll have to put a link to both of your websites. I only know of the Ascension one, so I'll have you let me know about your other website, and I'll put both links down below.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Ishtar. I'll let you go here. I really enjoyed speaking with you today.
Thank you very much. This is wonderful, Kyle.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll speak again.
Yeah, I do plan to get back to Minnesota. I so love Minnesota. That's actually where I learned this meditation technique. So I have a deep fondness for being by Minneapolis and St. Paul. So um, if actually not to go on for too much longer, but I'm kind of a sort of guy who's have meditation practice will travel. So if people want to set up a course, I'm pretty easy. At least until I leave for Europe. Logistically, it just takes a few people who want to learn, and I just try to mainly cover the cost of my plane ticket, and I'm easily lodged if I can avoid an Airbnb and just go into some cupboard under the stairs. I'm pretty happy, and so it's pretty easy to set up a class with me. Pretty simple.
Sure, sounds good. Thank you, Ishtar. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, bye.
All right. Bye.